lot of people don't know what their willingness to pay or their customers are, and they feel like they're trying to figure it out. But I think you have to remember that if you don't know what your customers are willing to pay for your product, then at the very least you can ask them. You can go ask them what would they be willing to pay for it. And you have to put a little bit of a, I guess, a skeptical lens on that when you go and ask them, because the information you get is not always going to be perfect, but it's going to be much more helpful than having no information.
Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where success, like great coffee, isn't about how fast you brew. It's about the craft, the consistency, and the people who keep coming back for more. Anybody else a coffee nut? And that is one of my favorite things. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. Why is it that some companies charge a premium and do extremely well, while others underprice themselves into oblivion? Spoiler alert, it's not about the actual value of the product. It's about perceived value. Pricing isn't just about covering cost or following industry benchmarks. It's a strategic tool that can dictate how customers see your product, how much they're willing to pay, and even how fast your business grows. Get it right, and you unlock profitability and customer loyalty. Get it wrong, and you're stuck in a cycle of discounting, churn, and missed revenue opportunities. That ain't good for nobody. So, in this episode, we are diving into the science and psychology of pricing. We're going to fix that. We'll unpack why so many early stage companies underprice their products, how to align pricing with your business objectives instead of blindly following industry norms or copying competitors, and the real role of freemium models in converting users, not just attracting free riders. It's brilliant, is his philosophy on this. But pricing isn't just a set it and forget it decision. This was news to me a few years ago. Like, we hadn't changed our price in 5 years. And it is an ongoing strategy that needs to evolve as your business scales. We'll talk about how and when to reassess your pricing structure, why bringing in consultants might be the smartest move, and the key mistakes to avoid if you want to maximize both revenue and customer retention, because those things are not mutually exclusive. If you've ever wondered whether you're leaving money on the table, 95% of companies are, or worse, undervaluing your own product, then this episode is just for you. Let's get into it. Our founder on Tuesday was Colin Stewart, CEO of Predictable Revenue. Colin shared insights on building scalable sales processes, achieving product market fit, and avoiding premature scaling. Colin's data-driven approach to sales has helped companies create repeatable revenue streams that drive long-term success. And our expert guest last week was Donald Kelly, award-winning sales trainer and host of the Sales Evangelist podcast. He revealed the secrets to authentic sales engagement. Donald shared how sales teams can break through the noise and build trust with buyers and close more deals in today's crazy competitive market. If you missed either episode, go back and check them out. Good stuff. My guest today is James D. Wilton, managing partner at Motivate. James led the pricing service line for Fuel, McKinsey's practice focused on fast-growing tech companies. With over a decade of experience helping companies monetize their products effectively, James is here to share actionable strategies for aligning pricing with value, avoiding common pricing mistakes, and driving sustainable growth. Welcome, James Wilton. Hey, James, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Hey, Jeff, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Today is all about pricing, and psychology is a really important part of that. Tell me a little bit about the background and how did you get to where you are today in regard to pricing?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely wasn't a straight line, Jeff. And I think that's true for many people in pricing. It's not, people don't tend to start their careers being off, I want to be a pricing expert. It finds you if it's going to find you, I
Sure.
think. But I got there through management consulting, really. I've always been a management consultant of some form or another. Started my career about 20 years ago, but I started off in sales and marketing work and doing a lot of strategy and ops. And then I ended up actually getting into pricing because I was about 2 years after business school. I was at a big firm called A.T. Kearney, and I had my first kid. And I suddenly went from the situation when I was traveling 4 days a week, but that was okay because my wife and I would hang out on the weekends and we'd just
Sure.
concentrate on getting our work done in the week, to a situation when I wasn't seeing my newborn kid except on weekends. And it was just, I wasn't living my values. It wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I was in this bind because I really liked consulting. I liked the variety and the way of working. I didn't really imagine myself getting an operational role, but I knew I couldn't keep doing this. So I was conflicted. Long story short, I ended up getting headhunted by this internal consulting team for a big company called Relex, or Reed Elsevier as it was then. And this consulting team focused on pricing strategy. And the idea was that every time one of their businesses needed to do a big pricing model change, they would bring in this internal consulting team and they would help them do it. So it was still management consulting. It was focused on pricing strategy, which I hadn't done anything of. Sounded fun. And it would be a lot better work-life balance for me. I'd be able to be at home a lot more. I wouldn't have to travel. I ended up rolling the dice, and as it turns out, found that I love pricing. It was way more strategic and had a lot more room for creativity than I think I thought it would from the outside looking in. And I was hooked. And I spent about 4 years with that team before deciding that I wanted to go back into external consulting, but just focus on pricing strategy. And that's what I've done ever since, really. A few different roles, but I built out a pricing practice at a boutique consulting firm called SBI. Then I went to McKinsey, and I was brought into McKinsey to lead the pricing service line for Fuel, which was the part of McKinsey that focused on startups and SaaS and other fast-growing tech companies. So at that point, I'd done a lot of SaaS and software work there, but I got really deep into the venture ecosystem and working with growth stage companies doing that. And then in about 2021, much as I loved McKinsey and I liked the way that we were doing the work, I increasingly found that clients didn't love our fees. There were very small companies who McKinsey budgets are tough. So I decided it would be really great to build my own consulting firm focused on pricing strategy that wanted to work with this sector of growing companies and kept the quality of work super high at that McKinsey level, but just was a little more flexible in terms of arrangement so that we could actually work with and help the companies that I was interested in working with. And that's been what I've done ever since. We've grown pretty rapidly and hoping to be the go-to provider for companies in this space.
That's outstanding. And I love that. A lot of companies do turn to consultants for pricing, maybe because we're too close to it, or it is a little bit black box. It's one of those things that just happens and there's a bunch of magic and we come up with a price, but don't necessarily know how. I think even smart companies can fall into that trap of not knowing how to price things and just best guess. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen companies make in regard to price?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree with everything you just said there, Jeff. I think pricing it's difficult, right? And it requires you to get into a specific mindset and have a particular set of experiences to do it well. And also it's very risky if you get it wrong. And I find that a lot of growing companies very early on in their tenure, they'll bring on like absolute best-in-class product people. And then they'll start to bring on really good salespeople and marketing people and build up that. Until you get to a certain level of growth, it is incredibly unlikely you're going to have somebody on your team who's an expert in pricing strategy and who knows how to change a pricing approach and what to change it to and how to do all of this. And I think that's why companies tend to reach out to consultants, because they don't have the expertise in-house and because the consequences of getting it wrong are potentially so severe. Not to dissuade anybody from making a pricing strategy change, but it obviously can go quite wrong. And there are lots of common mistakes that you see, especially early stage companies do. I probably won't be able to go through all of them. I think we probably need a few more hours.
Sure.
But I think like a couple of big ones that I see are, firstly, not aligning the pricing strategy with your business objectives. I think it's a really prevalent belief within SaaS particularly, I think, that if you are selling to a particular sector or working with a particular type of customer, there is a right way and a wrong way to build your pricing. If you are serving, I don't know, if you're serving enterprise pharmaceutical clients, there is a particular price metric you have to choose. There is a way of structuring your packaging. And that's not the case, right? There are conventions and there are things that are seen more frequently than others. But really, a lot of what should drive your pricing strategy is what you're trying to achieve. If you're a company and you're really focused right now on building a good base of volume with a view to monetizing later, then the right pricing strategy for that and pricing strategy, not just the price levels, but the structure around it as well, is going to be very different from if you're really looking to maximize revenue or maximize profitability out of the gate. If you're just defaulting to what everybody else in the space is doing, you're effectively pricing for somebody else's objectives. You're not pricing for yours. So it won't necessarily help you get to where you want to be going. So I think that's a big one.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Another mistake I see quite frequently, and this is probably an obvious one, earlier stage companies tend to underprice their products because they're often looking to gain traction and they don't necessarily know what it's worth yet. And I don't think the overall sentiment of that is wrong. It's definitely true. If you're looking to build volume, as we just talked about, then pricing on the lower side is going to ultimately allow you to build volume better than if you were pricing really high. But I think the issue is that you can box yourself into a place where it's very difficult to raise your price later on because people get anchored to what they're paying.
Yes.
So if you're providing a certain amount of value and you're charging, silly numbers just for the sake of example, $100 a month for it, then if you later decide on that actually this was actually worth $500 a month, when you try to make that change, even if technically it should be worth $500 a month, the company's got in their mind that I'm paying $100 a month for this amount of value. That is the right price for that amount of value. And it becomes very difficult for you to raise it up. Whereas a simple fix there would be to say, when you do the initial sale, we are building a product here that we think is ultimately going to be worth this much. Right now, it's an MVP. We haven't built out our entire feature set yet. So we are going to discount it by X% at the moment and give it to you for this price right now. And then at least in the back of the customer's mind, they know that they're getting a good deal right now, but they know that the pathway is to increase the price up to where they should be getting to. So that can be helpful just to prevent yourself from having difficulties down the line.
And is that something you think they really hold in their mind? Discounts are used in some, I don't know, weird ways, or I'd say it's worth this much, but here's your actual price. Is that something you think that they hold? Or is that something that they look at that and they go, okay, this is really the price is what we're paying, and all that other stuff is just fluff to make me feel like I got a good deal?
That's definitely probably going to be in some cases you feel like sometimes it is fluff when people do this.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of times.
A lot of times it's fluff.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely could be seen in that way, but there are a few guidelines that you can follow to make not seen it that way.
Okay.
I think there's something about the level of the discount, right? I don't know. You imagine if you go on Amazon and you see this like nice looking watch and it says MSRP $1,000, but it's a 95% discount and you can have it for whatever 50, right? Your alarm bells are ringing there. This is not really worth that much. You're just trying to make it seem like a good deal. So I think if the discount is absolutely crazy, then you're going to be suspicious. But usually you wouldn't be doing that. You'd be thinking more of a sort of a, I don't know, 40, 60% or something if you were truly early and you were aiming for something higher. So I think that's key. I think second thing, to your point, Jeff, yes, this could all be forgotten after the initial proposal, right? So the good thing about SaaS products is you don't just sell them once, right? You sell them to them every year or whenever the contract renews. So you can keep calling out what the list price is and what the sort of the discount is to remind them. And that's helpful when you're renewing because let's say that the list price was $300 per month and we're selling it to you for $100 per month and there's a discount from that. The next year it might be $150 because we built out a whole bunch of stuff and we're walking you up on this pathway to get you to the right price level so you can refresh the messages. And I certainly wouldn't be the person to suggest that any of this is trivial. The exact messaging, the way that you convey it is all very important. But
of course,
frankly, that's something else that we could probably spend a couple of hours talking about as well.
Oh, easily. And psychology is so much of that. And that's exactly what you've been talking about, just how to position it, how to message it. Yeah. And then aligning that pricing with perceived value rather than actual value. We talked about that before, just the importance of making sure that perceived value is there. What's key to understanding and influencing that perception in SaaS?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to back up, I guess, for anybody who hasn't heard things talk about this, I always say that actual value really doesn't matter that much when it comes to pricing, which sounds super provocative, right? But it's really just the fact that what does matter is perceived value, which is the amount of value that the customers can see within your product. And you can't just assume that they're going to see all of your actual value just because it's there. You have to be able to show them that. And I think, especially with startups and early stage companies, there is so much value that's lost because we didn't use the right messaging to be able to talk about
Right.
the product. So a couple of examples of how that might play out, right? I have actually worked with companies, believe it or not, who really they know that they create value, but they don't really have a massive understanding of what kind of value it is for the customer. They know the customer want it and they're willing to pay for it, but they don't exactly know the details why. And I've also seen companies in that space when they almost don't want to go and find out because they're afraid of being found out, right? If I don't understand why you value my product, how does that make me look?
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're not able to know how your customer gets value from it, you can't talk about it, you can't reinforce it. There's no way they're going to be able to see all of it, right? Certainly not consistently. Second thing is you might understand what kind of value that you are providing them, but you're not able to quantify it. I can say that this product is going to help you generate more revenue, and then the client says, how much? If you can't give an answer and say how much, then it's hard to back into really how much is worth for them, right? We know there is some value there, but we don't know how much. I'm going to guess, good chance I'll understate how much revenue growth is possible there, and I'm going to end up seeing less value than there actually is there. And it's even true on a qualitative basis as well. I find that a lot of times when companies are building out their products and they get very excited about building certain features and capabilities which we think are going to be like incredibly important and transformational to the customer, and that's great. But rather than going to the customer and saying, are these the things that are the key things that you think about when you're choosing between vendors, or you want to buy something, they just assume that it is. So all of their messaging is built around our internal assumptions about what is valuable and impactful to the customer, rather than telling the customer the things that they want to hear. So if you're speaking one language and they're speaking another language, then again, they're not going to be seeing all the value that is in your product, and they're probably going to end up underestimating it, and brings down their perceived value, of course, brings down their willingness to pay.
I think that happens a lot because we're really familiar with our product and we know all the value in there and we think all these features are great. And we just assume that they have that same knowledge, which is not the case at all. But just being able to read them and even just in pricing, yeah, underestimating what the willingness to pay is. I
Exactly.
think that's a really tough thing in thinking about is, in comparing to other products out there. And we set a price and we go, I don't know if they're willing to pay that or not. Or we think about raising the price. What's maybe some misconceptions around that leaders have about customer willing to pay and, what that is?
Yeah,
How do they
exactly.
get it right?
No, that's right. There are a ton of misconceptions around here, and I think the point you just landed on, Jeff, is super important because a lot of people don't know what their willingness to pay or their customers are, and they feel like they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I think you have to remember that if you don't know what your customers are willing to pay for your product, then at the very least you can ask them. You can go ask them what would they be willing to pay for it, and you have to put a little bit of a skeptical lens on that when you go and ask them, because the information you get is not always going to be perfect, but it's going to be much more helpful than having no information. And actually, I would say certainly with a lot of new companies, when you've built a product that customers are excited about and they really believe in it and they're champions for it and they'd refer it to their friends, if you go and ask them what they'd be willing to pay for their products, there's actually a very good chance they will tell you that they would pay more than they're currently paying. I actually have a really good example in this. Most of the time, when I do pricing research for companies, we do so in what's called a double blind way, right? So it means that when we're doing the survey, the respondent of the survey doesn't know who we are working on behalf of, so they don't know which company they are talking about.
Ah,
And also the client that we're working for can't see the sort of the actual responses for each individual customer or kind of attribute them to any particular people. So that allows the people who are like taking the survey to feel good and safe about sharing the information, because it's not going to be used against them, not individually in anyway. And of course, from the client side, the customer doesn't know that this information is going back anywhere. So that's the way it's usually done. It's more expensive to do it that way because you have to go and source these panels and so forth. So sometimes, like, the slightly less theoretically good way of doing it is actually approaching customers or buyers saying that you're working on behalf of this specific company. And I did that once for a company that had this SaaS product that basically allowed you to collect market research data basically like testimonials and ratings from customers that you can put on your website and show how well liked you are. And we surveyed these guys these customers knowing that we were working on behalf of this particular company, saying, let's say you bought this particular package, how much per month would you pay for it? The results that came in would say that like all of these customers on average would pay at least 50% more than they were currently paying for this product, because they could see that
Wow.
there was a huge amount of value there and they were happy to be paying extra. They wanted to support them. So there are definitely cases where if you're charging a really high price and your customers kind of resent having to pay so, then if you go and ask them how much they would pay for your product, they are probably going to lowball you, but it is not the case in every single situation. And going at that and getting that information is always helpful.
I like that. And yeah, I love being able to do that where it's not, here's the product and what would you pay? But that's one of the real benefits of working with a company like you, is having that third party research to do
Yeah,
that where it is a little bit blind. I think you get a lot more honest information
you
that
do.
way.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely the best in class way of doing it, because you know that there's a lot lower chance that the customer is strategically inputting numbers because they want people to think that the willingness to pay is lower than it actually is when you do it in that way.
Yeah. I think the founders a lot of times will set pricing just based on gut instinct early on.
Yeah.
What's your advice over time transitioning from founder led pricing where we start to something that's more data driven?
Yeah, exactly. I'd say my advice is like transition from what we talk about like as being founder-based pricing as soon as you possibly can, because it really doesn't take a lot, right? You don't necessarily have to do an enormous survey and do tons of research or anything. I would say some market data is better than none. I think actually a really humorous example in a way is OpenAI recently, right? Sam Altman, and OpenAI, they launched their pro version for Chat GPT, which they were charging at $200 per month.
Right.
And of course, everybody's reaction to that at the beginning is like, oh, wow, that sounds like a lot. But then he posted about it recently basically saying that A, I made up the $200 per month price point, and B, we're losing money on this because of the amount that people are using it when we are selling it to it. So that's founder-based pricing. There wasn't really a lot of thought that went into setting that $200 a year price point. And I don't think there would have had to be a ton of due diligence really that would need to be done to be able to flesh that out a little bit. Really looking at usage patterns across customers, or your usage costs. So if you're assuming that a certain number of customers are going to be using it at certain levels, you can probably figure out what the cost of that package is going to be to you.
Yeah.
And also some light willingness to pay research as well. Again, doesn't have to be extensive, but just getting the idea of, for these companies, for these users who are really high usage, do the Van Westendorp approach, right? What price would be a bargain? What price would be expensive but still worth considering? What price would be too expensive to even consider? And for other examples, maybe not for this one, right? What price would be so cheap that you'd start to question the value of the product there? If you can do that for just a good set of your customers, you have a really good range to work within. And you can pick a price point, which is going to be a price point that people will pay. And if profitability, or like at least covering your costs, is a goal, you can probably set the price within there that is going to make sure that you stay whole.
I think that's really good thinking. And I love the example because I remember when Pro came out, having conversations with people, I'm looking at it and thinking, that's a steal. I think that's fantastic. And then other people like, $200, that's 10 times what I'm
Huge.
paying
Yeah.
now. That's so
Exactly.
much. I'm like, okay. But
Right.
just the different reactions to the exact same number. I
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
really knowing your ICP, what is it that they want to do? How are you delivering value? And I look at that $200 a month. It's nothing compared to what it can do and do the work of a couple of people. And so other people, we can expand our team. We can take on a lot more business without having to hire a lot more people. There's just so much value in that. And other people look at it as it's 10 times what I'm paying today for just a little bit more incremental value.
Exactly.
So that
And honestly,
perception.
yeah, precisely. And that insight, honestly, Jeff, that is why I'd go as far as to say that the most powerful principle in all of pricing strategy is price differentiation, right? Which is basically charging different amounts to different customers based on the differences in their willingness to pay. There's There's so many studies been done. I've even got examples within my own work that just like simply taking like a kind of a one size fits all, this is our product, take it or leave it, and just creating tiers from that. The impact that makes to your revenues and your profits is just massive, because then you're able to bring in those kind of lower willingness to pay customers at a slightly lower price point that gives you profits that you otherwise wouldn't have had and revenue you wouldn't have had. And it allows you to charge higher to those customers who would pay more and would be willing to pay more than that other thing. If you just have a one option, you're just picking to the middle, which is why I think that what really makes a great pricing strategy is having that, what I would call a price structure. It's the system that allows you to scale your prices to customers of different size, type, needs, etc. And packaging is one way of doing that. And then what I call your price architecture. So, your price metric and the way that it scales the price is another. It's a way of using those things together to get to different price points based on these different willingness to pays. But then in order to do that, as you started to hit on, you really need to know your customers. You need to know your customer segments and how these different customer segments, what their needs look like, what their buying preferences look like, and what their willingness to pay is. And if you can understand that at a really deep level, then you can make a pricing strategy which prices, maybe perfectly is too strong, but prices well to each one of these different segments. And that's how you capture more value from your market.
Ready to dominate your market and skyrocket your revenue? Dive into Small Fish, Big Pond, delivering a world-class business that swims circles around competitors. This book is packed with powerful marketing and leadership insights guaranteed to transform your business and operate world class. Small Fish Big Pond delivers proven strategies to sharpen your marketing message, deliver unmatched value to your clients, and guide your prospects' buying journey to one inevitable conclusion: that your company is the only solution for them. Inside, you'll find step by step frameworks and time tested growth principles to attract your ideal clients, convert them, and then turn them into your passionate brand ambassadors. Grab your copy today in print, ebook, or audio at smallfishbigpond.com or on Amazon. Plus, remember, every book sale supports charity. All profits go there. Always have, always will. So dive in and make a difference. Packaging is really important. We'll definitely talk some more about that. But you mentioned like pricing metric or value metric to base pricing on. How do we pick that where it's the right metric? It's a lot of times historically it's been seats or usage-based pricing has started to take off, and that's all some sort of value. But sometimes I think that's all made up too. How do we identify the right one for our specific product?
Yeah, exactly. Can I start with what you shouldn't do?
Yes, please.
What you
I've
shouldn't
probably
do.
done it.
Loads of people have done it, honestly. I think the thing that you shouldn't do, and I alluded to this earlier, is that you shouldn't just pick the sort of the default knee-jerk metric that everybody else is using. There is still, I'm going to muck up the exact number, but I believe that still about 45% of B2B SaaS products still use number of seats or number of users as their predominant price metric.
Sure.
Now, I don't think in the right places, there's nothing wrong with seats as a metric. Sometimes it is. I would feel very confident in saying that seats is not the right metric for as many as 45% of SaaS companies. Definitely not. Because really what your right price metric should do is it should help you price differentiate. And if you want to price differentiate, you need to charge differently for people with different willingness to pay for your product, which is going to scale with differences in perceived value for your product. So in order for it to be the right price metric for you, it has to be a metric that aligns to the amount of value that a customer gets. So if you're in a space where the amount of value that you get is going to be dependent on the number of users who are using the product, then users probably is one of, if not the right price metric for you to do, because that is going to align with it. Oftentimes, however, it isn't always the case that as you add users, you get tons of extra value. Imagine that you were buying like an accounting software and you have a CFO and maybe you have an analyst to support them, right? Like you get tons of value from that first user, right? Like you need that in order for it to work. But do you get a whole bunch of extra value if you have an extra user there? If you have two, maybe you get like a little bit, because now you've got two people, but you don't get double the value, certainly, do you? And certainly if you then started scaling beyond that, then it wouldn't work at all, because there's probably nobody else in the organization who is going to use it. But the software might scale the value of the scale might scale with the amount of revenue that's running through the books, right? Or the number of deals that they're processing, or something that really does inform what they're applying the accounting software to, and therefore how much value is there. I'm not saying those things definitely are the right metric. I'm just saying I think that line of thinking to me is more value aligned than thinking about users in that case. But there's a lot of those softwares which are still priced on number of users, and it's because it's a throwback to the early days of software pricing when you'd
Right.
install everything on desktops and you have a number of CDs. So I think that reason is one of the reasons why you see a shift away from user-based pricing. Another reason in today's world actually is that we have a lot more automation now, APIs and so forth, and it's
Right.
possible for a single user to do more. Whereas you might previously have needed 3 people to do a certain job, maybe you can get away with 1 person doing it now because of all this automation. So if you are pricing based on number of users, then you might now expect the number of users to drop over time, certainly not grow, because people aren't going to be adding users to cover the job. They're just going to be able to do more with less. So it's going to shrink. And you see a number of companies recently have been pivoting, especially now that all these AI functionalities are coming out, because it's disrupting, and it means that this seat-based pricing doesn't work as well as it did anymore. Probably Zendesk is a great example of that, right? Used to price based on number of users within the customer support space, but because AI is coming along and the automations are taking a greater portion of the support calls, they would know that pricing based on number of users doesn't make sense anymore. It's going to ultimately erode their revenues. So usage-based pricing is often somewhere that people go to, but again, you have to pick the usage metric that aligns to the amount of value that you create. It's not just simply about picking a usage metric. And I think one mistake I'm seeing in Gen AI products a lot actually is that people aren't thinking value when they're thinking about the metrics that they are using. They're thinking cost, because they're thinking at the moment we're in the situation when Gen AI is so expensive for the vendor that I need to make sure that I cover my costs and I don't become massively unprofitable. So it's if I just find the metric which aligns to how I incur costs, then if I set price on that, then I make sure my costs are covered. The issue is that the metric on which you incur costs isn't necessarily value-based for the customer. Again, right? I mean, think about something like, I feel like I'm always picking on ChatGPT. Pick like a Copilot or a ChatGPT or anything in that kind of space that's this kind of like personal assistant type approach. ChatGPT is going to incur a cost every single time you ask a question to the system, right? Every time you do a prompt and you get a response, it's whirling away in the background and giving you stuff. So there is cost that's happening there.
Right.
As a user, you do not get value for every single one of those. How many times have you worked with a ChatGPT, right? And you can get to some really great answers at the end of it, but you might have to prompt and refine like 20, 30 times, right? So the value comes from all of that activity together. It doesn't come from each individual prompt.
Right.
So if you're charging a lot for every single prompt, then customers are going to be unhappy because they feel like you're nickel and diming them for something that doesn't give them value. And B, worst case, they may even start to second guess whether they want to do the prompt because they're not sure whether it's going to generate value or not. So you end up bringing your usage down because people are not sure. There are ways that you can control for that slightly through the architecture, which is like the way that you scale price with it. So you can make it flatter and you make it so that the price per prompt or per transaction goes down as you get up to higher number of units, but still, that's the fundamental challenge. It's much reduced if you can create a metric which better aligns to the value. So in that case that I just gave you, I would suggest maybe a better metric would not be the number of prompts, but would be the number of kind of working sessions, right? If I assume that all my prompts within a particular feed, within a certain space of time, are going to be towards getting to a certain answer, then if I'm lumping all the queries and the prompting within that activity together as just kind of one unit, that's probably quite value aligned for me. And it's not as cost aligned as charging for every prompt, but as long as you price it the right way, on average, it probably is, right? Because you're going to know, on average, for most users, how many prompts typically result in an answer in a session, etc., so that you can set yourself up to cover yourself. But that's it, really. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, that makes a lot of sense in doing that where it really is aligned, because you're exactly right. If I have to pay per prompt, I'm out after 3 or 4 tries and, "Hey, this is not working,"
It's
or
not
then
going
I'm
anywhere.
reluctant to use it because every time I don't know if I'm gonna get value and I know it's gonna cost, and so then that usage goes down, so it's self-defeating.
Yep, exactly.
The same kind of thing, there's a video generation tool I was trying out last week, and that's how they priced it. That was the price metric, is you had so many, and it started kind of freemium, and so you have 100 generations, and I'm 25 generations in and having to iterate, and it's not quite getting it, and this and that. And you get 25 into it, I give up because it
Right.
just, I'm going to use the 100 and maybe I'll get a couple of things that are useful, but it's just a waste of time. It's just not aligned with what I need, and the tools aren't quite there. See the
Exactly.
same thing in CRM. If it's price per contact, some people like that. I can't stand it because I want to have a lot of contacts in there. I want to be encouraged to add more contacts. But if it bumps me up from this tier to this tier, just because I added another 1,000 people to my list, that's it's not a great value for me because now
Yep.
the price just went up.
Went up a ton. That's it. That's a great example as well, honestly, of these kind of usage-based or capacity ones. And it is interesting, right? Because I think contacts it obviously does add value to you, right? Like it's more valuable to you if you have 2,000 users in there than if you have, sorry, 2,000 contacts in there than if you have 1,000 contacts. But it probably doesn't have twice the value. You'd
Right.
probably rather do less than that. So I think with these, if you are doing tiers and you're changing price based on something like that, like the real way to do it is to make sure that you do monetize those step changes, but you monetize in a kind of a non-aggressive way that doesn't put people off. I would suggest, again, you can tell me if I'm completely off base here. I think, let's say that you are operating with 1,000 contacts per month for a long time and you're paying, again, $100 a month for this,
Sure.
prices, right? If you then added another 1,000 contacts and they said, "Hey, Jeff, by the way, your price is now $200 per month," it would probably give you pause for thought. You'd be like, "Do I really want to double my price to have these extra contacts in there?
Right.
Maybe I should take some out." Unless those happen to be incredibly valuable contacts, you're going to really second guess it. I think if you put in those extra 1,000 contacts and they said, "Hey, Jeff, you put in an extra 1,000 contacts, we need to now charge you $120 per month, $125 per month."
Yeah.
Then you're probably thinking there is some extra value in there. I wouldn't pay. This seems like a reasonable, small but meaningful upcharge to give me like literally twice my number of contacts. That sounds okay, and I'm in. So
Yeah.
it's not just about the metric, it's about how you scale the price with the metric. And of course, as with anything, we all are programmed to expect volume discounting. So we're going to expect that the price per incremental unit is going to go down as you add more and more.
That makes sense. What's your take on I mentioned freemium or trials, things like that? Pretty popular in SaaS product-led growth. They're not always effective. What's the biggest pitfall that companies face with freemium, and how do they avoid that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, freemium it is a really powerful tool if it works. And obviously if you are doing product-led growth, it's definitely one of those strategies that fits very well in there. I actually think I did a study recently where I found that most of the companies out there that are doing product-led growth have some kind of free offering within that. And I guess for anybody who's listening who doesn't understand what product-led growth is, super quickly, in traditional models, we had sales-led growth, where it's the sales force who are charged with acquiring leads and nurturing them and bringing them on and ultimately converting them. In product-led growth, it's all done by the product, right? So it's basically the product is going to pull people to the website, educate them, nurture them, and then ultimately allow them to transact and get onto a product just all through the website. And we're seeing more and more of those kind of models as the technology enables it, really. Like it's more viable to do that kind of thing now than it was previously. But I think within freemium in there, like the principle, like the way that a freemium is going to end up working for you is if you can get enough free users onto your platform and the amount of those free users which you are able to convert to a paid user, like the revenue that you get from that conversion step and from the upsells thereafter, if there are extra steps, has to ideally significantly outweigh the cost of having your free users on that platform. And I think there's a few things that are going to make that true and viable, right? One is you have to be able to serve these free users in a relatively inexpensive way, right? If you're going to rack up a ton of costs for every single free user that you are bringing on, it's going to be very difficult for that to make sense. So if
Right.
you have a product where there is a lot of setup required or custom installation, or there's a huge usage cost between doing what you do, reality is it's going to be very difficult to make that work. I think you also have to be able to create a very valuable free product so that there are going to be free users who are never going to convert from free users, and you have to accept that. I
Right.
think a lot of people make that mistake, right? They kind of see the free users as being a bad thing and we need to get them all to paid. In order for a freemium version to really work, you need to have a portion of your customers who are going to buy the free and are going to be absolutely delighted with it and are never going to ever want to upgrade ever. And that's great because those users then become champions of it. They
Right.
love it. They will attract other people to the platform and they'll pull them all in. So you need that. But then at the same time, you need to be able to set a value threshold on that free version so that all the users who are at least capable of getting more value out of the product have to be pushed onto that paid version. And I'll say the mechanic of drawing that line really difficult, right? Because it's like, how do I make it so that it's great and valuable, but it's not going to be enough for a good, meaningful portion of my customers? And I think the art of designing a really good freemium strategy is that, really. It's like, where do you draw that line? I think it's complicated by the fact that another thing is you need your first paid level within your freemium approach, your first paid package has to be priced quite low, because it's a lot easier to get people to pay more once they're paying something than it
Mm.
is to get someone who's paying nothing to pay something. You want that kind of first threshold that they cross over to be relatively low, and then you can pull them up into higher price levels through your other mechanics of your model.
That's
So
really
you have to be,
smart.
yeah, exactly. So you have to be able to do all of that, really. And I think the last thing is something a business has to have for this whole sort of freemium and funnel type approaches. There has to be a lot of users, potential users out there that you can reach so that you can get enough people onto the platform, so that you get enough people onto the paid versions initially to make the economics work. And it really means that your product, at least the value at the user level, has to be sufficiently broad so that there are lots of users out there that you can attract through that way. So if you happen to have a product which is extremely niche and there's only like the users of this are very specific, tight in individuals where it's difficult to identify them and it's difficult to market to them, then that kind of product-led approach is never really going to make a ton of sense, right? It's going to be far easier for you to go through for a sales-based approach and find them and pitch them and convert them.
Yeah, think about that. Freemium, I think it's really smart to have that free to something paid. And then I like just the psychology of once they're paying something, it's easier to increase that. How many tiers do we need? Like I've seen the common thing is good, better, best. One of the CRMs I was thinking of a minute ago, I remember looking at it and they had 8 pricing tiers. And I'm looking at it like, I don't even know. Next.
Yeah,
So
no,
how
exactly.
many tiers is right? How should we think about that?
Exactly. I'm going to give a really good typical consulting answer of it depends
It depends.
for this one, James. No, it does
It
depend a
does.
little bit. I would say that 8 is the amount of times that 8 is going to be the right number of tiers is going to be a very small portion of the overall pie. I would say like that feels like a lot to me, but there's definitely cases where fewer is better and there's cases where more is better. And I think what would dictate it would be a little bit of the dynamics that you're selling to. If you're selling to consumers, for example, consumers need very simple pricing strategies, right? Because they're not going to go in and, in general, spend a ton of time researching and weighing up exactly what they want. They're going to go to a pricing page. They're going to look at the options. They're going to quickly make a assessment about which package is right for them, and they're going to end up picking those. So if you end up with 8 tiers with that kind of situation, that's going to make them more likely to not make a buying decision, and they're going to go away, right? It starts to feel too complex for them. But then there are also buyer segments you might be doing PLG and freemium strategies too that can tolerate a little bit more complexity. I would say that prosumers or small medium business type buyers, you can't think of them as enterprise buyers because it is more that you're selling to a specific person and psychology matters and they're crushed for time. It's not like they're a procurement person who can like really think through all the different options there. So they do
Right.
need simplicity, but they can probably handle more complexity than can a consumer. Plus also there's more value at stake for you in terms of price differentiating on those SMBs than there is on a consumer. Because say that although you're going to have different consumers with different willingness to pay, there's probably not going to be a massive range in terms of what one consumer will pay. But a small and medium business who could be buying something, the small end of that could be like literally two people, tiny business, mom and pop, right? And the large end of that could be 50 employees, right? So
Right.
I don't know what the price metric is yet or what the thing is, but I can be sure that company who's got 50 employees is probably going to be willing to pay a lot more than the company who's only got two. So I have more of an incentive to create more levels of differentiation there. So that might push me to create more tiers. It might also mean that rather than creating more tiers, I scale the price of these tiers by a certain metric. That's the thing that a lot of people forget that you can do here, right? Is that you don't have to just have a flat price for a tier. You could also say that this tier is priced per user, per 1,000 contacts, per whatever it is, right? Per a certain number of transactions. So you can start building that complexity into it, still keeping it transparent and simple enough to be able to work with that particular segment, but making it monetizing enough to work all the way through. So I guess bringing that back to the eight eight tiers, maybe there is a situation out there where you need that level of granularity, and perhaps I haven't seen it. If all those tiers are incredibly well defined and the difference between them is super clear and it makes it very easy to navigate that, maybe that could work. As a gut reaction, 8 tiers feels like probably more than you would ever want to put on a pricing page.
Well, it was something I was definitely interested in, and just the pricing was confusing, so I moved on and bought something I understood.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
it didn't work. Yeah, so
Yeah.
finding the right balance. So if you were to create a, say, simple 3-step framework for SaaS founders to rethink their pricing, what would that include?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So I think first thing would be starting with objectives. As I said, I think about what are you trying to achieve with your pricing strategy? Very strategic, high level here, not just in terms of pricing. Think about what are our business goals over the next 2 to 3 years. That's usually a good window for thinking about a pricing strategy, right? 2 to 3 years, assuming you're growing. What are we trying to achieve? Are we prioritizing revenue growth versus volume growth, or is it like revenue growth with constraints on volume? Whatever it is, try to really nail down what that is and prioritize them, because different pricing strategy elements are going to satisfy different objectives. And if you haven't got a prioritized set of what is most important, what is next, it's going to be very difficult for you to evaluate the trade-offs when you start to do those. So I think that is step one. I think step two is really understanding your market and how your market thinks about your product. So getting doesn't have to be heavy, some light voice of the customer, doing some interviews, maybe doing a very light survey just to understand how the customers think about value, right? What scales the value for them, right? Is it that I get more value with more users? Do I get more value with more context? Try to think about what those potential value scalars, price metrics could be, and test those with them to understand that. Try to understand how much complexity they can tolerate as well. Do they just want you to tell them exactly what they need to buy and they will buy it? Or do they want a couple of simple options? Or do they want a lot of customization and control right across that? You do that research and you get really good data across all of those different segments you might be thinking about. Fantastic bedrock for your pricing.
Great.
Also, I think within that, I'd put it in the same bucket, is getting some kind of competitor research in there as well. Really understand what your competitors are charging, what their price structure is, what they're offering within those different things, how their sort of product compares. You don't want to be copying your competitor pricing, but you know that your prices are always going to be compared to theirs, so you have to make sure that it stands up relative to them, right? Like when they think about your value relative to your competitors, are they going to feel good about your price level and the way that you're structuring it relative to what your competitors are charging? And then the last thing is really, I think once you've got all of that information, you have a really good set of information to base a pricing strategy. So then you go and you make your pricing strategy decisions. And I think you have to think about packaging and price architecture together. So again, packaging, tiers or different structures, price architecture, what is the price metric or price metrics, and how are you scaling them? You have to think of them together because choices that you make within packaging are going to impact the choices that you can make within your architecture. For example, like if you go to 8 tiers on packaging, you probably have got to be very simple in terms of the architecture, because if you start adding complexity there, then it's like you were already put off by the 8 tiers. Imagine if you had to navigate all that as well. Likewise, if you go quite complex on the price architecture, you need to keep your packaging simple. Think about those, and it's really going to be all about what is going to be the best mechanism for me to price differentiate across my customer base. Once you've got that, you then want to be just setting your price levels for every level of your architecture and your packaging, which is really going to be applying that data that you got for price setting to the structure and getting you in a place where the price levels you're setting are going to be helping you achieve your objectives. We talked earlier about, are these going to be price levels that maximize volume, in which case you want to be pricing towards the low end of that Van Westendorp range? Are they going to be maximizing revenue or profits, in which case you're going to be pushing much, much higher?
That is so good. I love the simplicity of that framework. That is something that anybody can do, just that very practical. And I would add a fourth one to that, and that is grab a copy of Capturing Value. It's a very approachable, very good pricing book, or pricing guide, pricing, just the way to think about pricing. Tell me about the Capturing Value, and how would you describe it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for bringing it up, Jeff. But Capturing Value it's a book I've been working on for quite a long time. I've been working on it for about 4 years, right? And I really wanted it to be a reference for a certain individual that I keep seeing across many of these growing companies. As I mentioned to you earlier, right, you often don't have people within these companies who have experience in pricing,
Right.
but they do need to change their pricing at some point, right? The pricing that got you here is not going to get you there. And so what usually happens is, like, the board or the CEO or something says to one of the executives, hey, by the way, you need to create us a new pricing strategy now. And this person has no experience in this space, so doesn't know what works and what doesn't work. I don't know if you've taken a spin around the internet for good guidance on SaaS pricing, but there's a lot of stuff out there. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily super useful. It could be misleading, could be wrong. So that's tough. And obviously the consequences of getting it wrong are pretty severe. And if you're the guy who's got to do that, then that puts you in a really difficult position. I feel for these people who are put in this position. Sometimes they get access to consultants to pull them in help, and that's great. Oftentimes they don't have budget. So what do you do? So the idea is that Capturing Value is a book which can take them through the entire process of doing this. It breaks down what you need to think about for pricing into different chapters. There's theory in every chapter. Like, theory is theory. We want to be practical, but you need to get yourself in the mindset within each one of these areas. So you need to understand the philosophy within each one of these areas, understand what your options are, the pros and cons, and then think through the steps, the practical steps that you need to take in order to build out what you should be thinking about within those. So really, if you were somebody who needed to build a pricing strategy and you read Capturing Value from front to back, you did all the exercise and you came out, you should be in a really good starting point to be able to have a new pricing strategy on the table.
Outstanding. And it is, I think I said pricing book, pricing guide, because it's step by step guidance in kind of building your pricing model, how to think about it, how to implement that, how the packaging. So it's a lot more than just pricing. So you got
Yes.
what metrics to track, the packaging, those kinds of things. But it's very approachable. And I think that's one of the things that really differentiates it from some of the other books out there. They're very theoretical, or just here's a bunch of theory, but it's not the step by step. Here's how to go do this. And that's one of the things I really like about the book.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I'm glad. That's how we hope to design it. Wanted it to be usable by people. So I hope that
Yes.
that comes across for the readers.
Outstanding. Where can people learn more about you online, and where can they get a copy of Capturing Value?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can learn more about me personally online at my LinkedIn profile, which is James D. Wilton. You can learn more about the book at the website for the book, which is capturingvalue, all one word, .com.
Outstanding. We'll make sure and link both of those in the show notes, and everybody should get a copy of the book because it is extremely helpful.
Thank you, Jeff.
James, awesome conversation. I mean, so much value today. Thanks for being on SaaS Fuel.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed the conversation, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again, James, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about James and Motivate at motivate.com. It's like money and motivate. It's cool stuff. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. Our channel is at Champion Leadership. We have full video episodes, reel shorts, training, lots of valuable things over there for you. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with someone who enjoys thought provoking discussions and then have a thought provoking discussion about the episode and their pricing. When's the last time you changed your pricing? For us, it was way too long till we heard it from experts like James. Everyone who shares this week gets a lifetime supply of imaginary pizza with unlimited toppings and 0 calories. What if you could take your startup from concept to cash flow in months instead of years? Join us next time as David Hirschfeld, founder of Launch First, shares how his system helps software startups avoid the common pitfalls that lead to failure and build a profitable business faster. He is doing amazing things over there. I love their methodology and how they're getting things to market. Really unique. Then next Thursday on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, we sit down with Rajiv Nathan, Raj Nation, the voice of startup culture and the founder of Startup Hype Man, to break down how founders can craft a winning pitch that captivates investors, customers, and partners. The experience as a TED speaker, hip hop artist, and professional MMA announcer, Rajiv brings a unique high energy approach to storytelling that you won't want to miss. He is one of my favorite interviews of all time. And so that'll be next week. So I will see you on the next episode. And as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.